like to welcome you all. I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us for this extraordinary conference, and especially to this session titled Suicide, Self-Harm, with our speaker, Carlotta Saiz, Clinical Program Director for the Sky Center, the New Mexico Suicide Intervention Project in Santa Fe. Hopefully you will all have our flyer that describes Carlotta's resume more fully, so I won't waste time and I'll turn over to Carlotta to share her expertise with us. Carlotta, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go, Allison.
Go ahead then.
All right. So am I going to see the PowerPoint?
I will bring it up right now.
Got it. Okay, sorry. I don't mean to put pressure.
No, that's okay. And once Eric gets in, if he announces, we'll stop just for a second, unshare, take the picture, and then go right back.
Great.
I'm here.
Oh, Eric, you're here?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Let's go ahead and...
Yeah, if everybody just give me a good smile, and then I will get out of your way. Perfect. Y'all enjoy.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Eric. Okay, let's go back to here and here.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I just want to check in. Do I still have 20 minutes or do I now have 15 or 16?
You go with your 20 minutes and we'll
Great.
work on the other end.
Okay. All right, because there's so much to say here, and I want to just first thank you all for being here and choosing to listen and learn about this topic. It's something that's near and dear to my own heart. I've been doing this work for about 17 years, and the Sky Center is an important, special place for me. So youth suicide and awareness prevention for the girls' empowerment is what we're talking about. I'm going to add that self-harm is going to be weaved into this. I'm going to say suicide a lot of the time. There is sometimes a difference between suicidal ideation or suicide and self-harm. They don't always necessarily go together, but they can. Someone who is self-harming is at risk for suicidal ideation, but because someone is self-harming does not mean that they are suicidal. So of course, there's going to be lots of time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions about that, you can jot that down. Okay, next slide, please. So the Sky Center is located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and our mission there is to meet the challenge of youth suicide in Santa Fe and in northern New Mexico. And we do that through lasting solutions that encourage hope, resiliency, courage, connection. I'm sorry, I said hope first, but there it is at the end. I'll say it again, and hope. It's a really big part of our mission. A lot of times, we know that there's a big problem, and we feel at the Sky Center it's really important to focus also, like, as much, if not more, on the solution. So next slide, please. Okay, so talking about impact in New Mexico, these are just some statistics here that sadly we are normally at about 2 times the rate of youth suicide as anyone else, any other state in the nation. And inside of that statistic, girls are more likely than boys to attempt suicide. Boys are more likely to complete suicide, but girls are more likely to attempt. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in New Mexico for youth, just behind traffic accidents. And that remains consistently to be true for as long as we've been gathering this data. And then the statistic about LGBTQ plus youth is important because we have more and more youth and girls who are identifying as LGBTQ plus, and as a demographic, they are more marginalized and therefore at higher risk of suicidal behavior than other youth. And in the last couple of years, this last bullet point speaks to the 2021 results about New Mexico Youth Resiliency and Survey, where we talk about suicidal risk and youth having a plan of some sort to attempt suicide. That has increased significantly by 18%. It has increased from within a couple of years for students who seriously consider suicide. And then it's increased by 26% for youth who have a plan for suicide. And that may be obvious that the part of this increase is the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. One of the risk factors to youth suicide that we'll talk a little bit more about later in the presentation is isolation. And so social connection was really, for all of us, but for youth in particular, heavily impactful on them. And so these are probably where a lot of this statistic comes from. So next slide, please. So we're going to look at two slides. What can depression look like and what can anxiety look like? And I don't want to waste your time by reading through all of this to you, but this is, there's an asterisk at the bottom of this slide that clinical diagnosis is offered when symptoms have been persistent and pervasive for at least 2 weeks. So these are not, we're not trying to tell you and teach you how to diagnose, but it's important to understand sort of what depression can look like. And also that youth, by nature, being in the developmental stage that they are, experience these kinds of symptoms anyway, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are depressed or suicidal even. But we're looking in differences in moods, right? So if a youth was at one time more outgoing and then is less so, and that's becoming consistent for, again, more than 2 weeks, that's a concern. These changes in behaviors, right? The physiological changes, more stomach aches, more headaches, having chronic illnesses, and then cloudy thinking and judgment. So the cognition is something that we're paying attention to in youth and noticing if there's any major changes in this. Next slide. And so this one is on anxiety, and similarly, at that asterisk at the bottom, we're looking for these symptoms to have been present for most days for 6 months. So again, these are things that youth are going to experience just because they are youth. But if they're becoming pervasive and persistent, we are concerned, and we're going to start looking at ways to help, and we'll get to that. And next slide, please. So these risk factors and warning signs are taken directly from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. And so these are kind of nationally recognized as risk factors and warning signs for suicide. And so the risk factors on the right-hand side of the screen are things that, may just be, these are a part of somebody's life. These happen, to just because somebody is in a gang doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be suicidal. Just because somebody has access to firearms in their homes does not mean, but these are things that put a youth at higher risk if they are present. And then the warning signs on the left-hand side that's when this is more of an alarm going off, right? So I look at risk factors as like the yellow light, and then, or the orange light, and then the red light is the warning signs. So when we see something like this, we want to take a little more serious action. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. Next slide. So I keep referring to this slide that we'll talk about. So how to help. Now, this is something that we pulled together at the Sky Center as a kind of a recipe for how we can help when, and it's something that anyone can do. We have a peer mentor or peer helping peer group at the Sky Center called Natural Helpers, and we teach this to them. So these are kids going into learning this and going into the school and being the kind of the eyes and ears of the school around mental health concerns. And so, as you can see, the first step in this process is to just be observant, right? To kind of know some of the things that were on those slides on what can depression look like and what can anxiety look like. Just noticing if there's something different in a kid, in a girl. And then at the bottom bullet point on this is paying attention to your intuition and trusting your own judgment and your own gut. This is a really important part of this because oftentimes we don't, because we don't want to believe necessarily that somebody is struggling as much as they are, because that's hard, because then what do we do? Well, we show that we care. And that looks different for most people, right? You know what it looks like when you show that you care. And so some of the examples we give are just, I'm concerned about you and how you're feeling, right? Just kind of keeping it really simple and straightforward. I've noticed that you've been really sad lately. But knowing kind of what your way of genuinely showing that you care is important. And then the third step in this is asking that tough question. So it's important that we not beat around the bush. It's such a hard thing to say, and I understand that. Getting those words off of your tongue can be difficult. But what research shows is that it's important to actually ask the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you been hurting yourself? If somebody has been hurting themselves, they say yes to that question, asking to see the wounds. And hurting yourself is, the self-harm that we're talking about. So this is where we pull the suicidal ideation or the self-harm out of isolation, because what we know about suicidal ideation and self-harm is that what keeps it alive is secrecy, being in the dark, being isolated, being alone. And when we're asking this question, all of a sudden we're shining this big bright light on it. And we know that that is what helps dissipate suicidal ideation and self-harm ideation. And then the final step is getting help, right? So how do we do that? We want to contact family or somebody that a youth is, an adult that a youth is trusting of, and having available resources, which I can actually provide for you for the Santa Fe area if you're interested in, and talking about what they're doing that might be helping, making suggestions for what could help, and then if necessary, making a phone call together to get help. Whether that's to the crisis line, to the Sky Center. We'll have all of our contact information available at the end of this slide. So next slide, please. So this is where we weave in all of the hope for this problem. And we've designed this toolkit for well-being at the Sky Center. And the toolkit for well-being is, as you can see, on the right side of all of these bars is the risk factors that we, through our own research at the Sky Center, have identified and really do kind of coincide with what the CDC slide said. And then on the left-hand side, what we have identified are the antidotes to the risk factors. So I'm just going to slide by slide go through all of the antidotes. So next slide, please. So the first antidote is social connection, and it is the antidote to isolation. And so, as I mentioned, that one of the greatest risk factors for suicidal ideation is isolation, and that suicide itself thrives on being in isolation and being held within the person. And that when we connect and we are talking about it, it doesn't have to necessarily be talking about it to help it reduce, but it's important we have somebody to talk to about it, and then that we're still living life and that we're connecting with others. And this again falls into that second slide about the impact in New Mexico and how detrimental it was for youth to be isolated during the COVID pandemic when we were all at home. So social connection says that we are wired to belong, that we as human beings desire connection over rejection. That's just a fact. So next slide, please. So self-regulation is the second piece of the toolkit, and this is the antidote to impulsivity. So impulsivity is, again, a characteristic developmentally of youth, of girls that are, in the youth age range. And so learning how to self-regulate is going to be our friend, right? And this is one of the things we talk a lot about in our inner and outer life skills groups at the Sky Center that we bring into the Santa Fe Public Schools when we're working with families. And the thing is right, you can't change your brain that you are impulsive at the age range that we're talking about with girls, but we can learn how to manage the impulsivity. So we can't stop the waves, but we can learn how to surf them, is this piece of the toolkit. And so the next slide, please. Mindful awareness. So mindful awareness is going to be the antidote to the wandering mind. And so I like to say that our brains, our minds are great time travelers. And so we have a heart, we, as human beings, it takes effort to stay mindful and be in the present moment. The wandering mind, so when we're kind of thinking ahead and getting ahead of ourselves, that can sometimes look like and become anxiety. And then when we are sort of in the past and sort of perseverating on things that have already happened that we're not happy about, that can look like and become depression. And so this is what we mean when we say the wandering mind. And so learning mindfulness, and it can be as simple as like how to, know how to calm yourself down when you're feeling triggered or agitated, and by taking a deep breath. But these are, again, some of the skills that we teach in some of our services and programs at the Sky Center. Next slide. So physiological well-being. Now, this is the antidote to adverse health conditions. So illnesses, right, like those stomach aches and headaches that I mentioned earlier that are common physiological symptoms for kids. And so physiological well-being is about making sure you're eating, drinking, and getting exercise regularly, right? And it's watering the plant of you. So this is one of the important pieces of the toolkit too. So just next slide, please. And then hope. Hope is the antidote to hopelessness, right? And there's this beautiful Desmond Tutu quote that hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. And one of the simplest ways that we like to address hope when we're first meeting with a youth is to just find out kind of what they're looking forward to. And this doesn't have to mean like graduating high school. This doesn't have to mean, anything major. It can be, what are you looking forward to tonight? And what are you looking forward to this weekend? and kind of keeping it that small helps keep a youth, a girl, safe one day at a time. And sometimes that's what it's looking like. And so we're talking to parents about how they can talk to their kids about this as well. Okay, next slide. So the last piece of the toolkit is nature. And this is the antidote to disconnection from the bigger picture or loss of meaning. And as some of you may be able to identify with, nature can really just make us feel that we are connected, and there's something so much bigger out there than us, and that can be a relief. This can also be religion for some people, and this can be spirituality, but it's anything that's kind of bigger than us. Being able to have a focus on that is the antidote to the loss of meaning. So next slide, please. Now I have a couple of minutes, so I feel like it's important that we talk about kind of how we are addressing this as an organization at the Sky Center. So these are the programs that we offer. So we have a graduate advanced studies training. And actually, we'll do this slide by slide as well, because I have images too to kind of match up with these. So next slide, please. So this is, we at the Sky Center, we are every year for the academic year, we're training a cohort of about 12 interns who are second year graduate social work, counseling, or psychology students. And they are behind this. So this is a mirror. This is our observation room. A family is on the other side of that mirror. And it's a one-way mirror that we can see them. They can't see us. They know we're there. We have a clinical supervisor there every night of the week. I'm there on Tuesday nights. And then the interns are seeing the families, and then their team is also behind the mirror observing. So we're training graduate students to go out into the field and be trained in suicide ideation intervention. The services at the Sky Center range from prevention to intervention into postvention. So we cover the whole spectrum in our services. And so this is just one of those. Next slide, please. So we have free family counseling at the Sky Center. And so, as I mentioned, interns are doing the family therapy with live supervision by a licensed clinical supervisor. And so we feel like it's extremely important that we are able to provide these services to any and everyone who needs them. So we are grant and donor based only, local. And this also reduces barriers, right? So if we have families that are, for example, not documented, we aren't asking for social security numbers, we're not asking for insurance, we will see anybody who comes through the doors, and as long as there's a youth involved in that situation. And next slide. Inner and outer life skills groups. So these are groups that we're bringing into the Santa Fe Public Schools, and our interns are paired with a trained mentor, group facilitator, and we are teaching from the toolkit for well-being that I just talked about. This is part of the prevention. These youth don't have to be suicidal, but these are kids who are somewhat at risk. And so we're just talking about all of those pieces of the toolkit with our youth and through activities and discussion. Next slide. This is our Adolescent Hugs program. So we are in partnership with Christus St. Vincent Hospital, where they are tracking youth that come in for mental health, behavioral health concerns. And so this is to try to reduce the use of the emergency room and getting families linked with services. So if a youth comes through the emergency room, they meet the criteria for being at high risk, which they automatically do by coming into the emergency room for a behavioral health concern. They are linked with the Sky Center, and then we're starting to see them for family therapy. Okay, next slide, please. And then this is our Natural Helpers program. So these are some of our previous Natural Helpers, where we are in all of the middle schools in Santa Fe. And we bring, the school themselves identifies youth that are natural helpers. So these are just youth that are demonstrating those skills that, you know, maybe potentially they're going to one day be a counselor. And we bring them out to Camp Stony, which is out in the kind of the wilderness here in Santa Fe. This is bringing the nature piece in. And we teach them the how to help that I went through with you. And through activity and discussion, just teach them how to be effective helpers in their school. And so, yeah, this is one of our more popular programs. Okay, next slide, please. And then postvention. So this is the end of the spectrum, prevention, intervention, postvention. So this is when, in the unfortunate circumstances where a youth has died by suicide, or in this case, this was this photo you're seeing is a youth who was in a horrible car accident in Santa Fe and died. He and his dad died. And so we come in and provide support to the school and the staff, the students, in whatever way that looks like for them. But we are available and on hand for whenever there's any sort of crisis. We've had even when a teacher or a staff member has died, we're going to be in the school to provide services. And then next slide, please. And then our trainings and presentations, kind of like what I'm doing here for you today. We do this throughout Santa Fe and northern New Mexico to be able to offer tools and inspiration for the community. And we do this, we alter all of our trainings to kind of meet the audience that we are in front of. And so, yeah, that's I think the final list of services. Yeah, and this beautiful slide is really just here to represent, so this beautiful reflection is kind of where we are coming from at the Sky Center, all the way from our staff to our interns to the families. We are all kind of talking about doing implementing the toolkit for well-being. So our staff is committed to all of those pieces of the toolkit. We meet regularly. We talk about self-care. We go out, and when we meet as a big group, we do it in nature. And then we are teaching this to our interns, and then in turn talking about this with our families and other youth that we're serving. And next slide, please. And these are our ways that you can contact us. And I won't hold you any longer. That concludes the presentation.
Well, goodness, Carlotta, you have given us a lot to think about. This is an amazing presentation, and thank you very, very much indeed. I think that those of us who haven't experienced things like this still feel that it's speaking to all of us, especially when it comes to anxiety and depression and things like that. I'm going to start the questions, and then I'll open the floor up to everybody else. But I wanted to say, perhaps you could give some thought before we get to the stage where a child is anxious or self-hurting. is there something that parents and people can do? I'm trying to think that Rotary has a youth leadership camp, and in that camp we have one particular session where the kids are able to answer questions. Everybody's involved, so it's not like you're picked on to answer a question, but the question is generic. Has anybody in your family ever committed suicide or something like that? And the kids step forward to indicate that that has happened to them. They don't have to say anything. And afterwards, we go into smaller groups, break out into smaller groups, and address some of the questions that those kids asked, because it is a very traumatic process for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered, that's a specific camp, but is there some way that Rotarians and Rotarians in their clubs might be able to set up something like that, where they're not necessarily picking on any group of kids, but able to reach out to a lot of kids? I.e., is there something that you have in your community or that is specially designed for schools where Rotary clubs could perhaps facilitate something like that? Or do you even think that's a good idea?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Allison, I love what you described that about how you talk about this in this group setting, and that you're asking this question directly, which is, as you saw, really important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I'm just going to kind of pick on for just a second is the language that we're trying to get away from is committing suicide, because we commit crimes, right? And so it's died by suicide, completed suicide. So those are just some of the just little language piece there.
Thank you.
You're asking whether Rotary as a group would be able to get involved in schools in the way that you are in your leadership camps?
Yes, where because the leadership camps, the kids are specifically chosen for them, and they already have shown that they are leaders. Often they come in with a ton of self-confidence and high self-esteem. This is not actually the group of kids that we're trying to reach, although many of them have had the same sort of problems. So I was wondering if we could expand it in some way, so that it could be a community effort or in the schools itself. And I just wondered if you had anything like that, or any ideas about setting it up.
Yeah, so that would probably be, of course, a question more for the schools specifically. But what we do is we have this, what's called we have a contract with the Santa Fe Public Schools. They house us at Ortiz Middle School. And what we do in return is we provide all of the prevention, intervention, postvention that Santa Fe Public Schools needs ever. And so we have very unique asks here and there. So last year, and this was kind of a year after COVID, there was a lot of need inside of the classrooms. We had a teacher who reached out to us and said, I have suicidal ideation and self-harm spreading in my classroom. Now it wasn't even a classroom, it was a grade, so it was multiple classrooms. How do we address this? And so we came in with our trainings and presentations, and we developed a workshop for the students that was, age appropriate, designed around how to start talking about this and what we need to do to help kind of alleviate this problem that is spreading amongst our youth. So we do that whenever we're asked, like I said, and are actually amping this up a little bit. And because of the need is higher. For Rotarians, I would love for the Sky Center to collaborate with you all. And so perhaps this is maybe a longer term discussion. And then I would encourage you to reach out to the Santa Fe Public Schools too.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. I would like to open it up to the audience and wonder if anybody would like to ask a question. I have plenty more if you don't. But are there any questions out there? If you have, just raise your hand, or
Okay.
if you don't know how to raise a hand, oh, there we go. Angela, would you like to ask your question? You'll need to unmute.
You touched on self-care. And one of the things that I teach is that self-love is so much more important than self-care, because it's our thoughts that drive behaviors or impulsivity. And if we can teach kids to look in the mirror and be able to find the things they like rather than the things they don't like, that would be one aspect of self-love. Another would be teaching kids that their self-criticism, teaching them that to ask, would I say this to my best friend? So do you have anything like that?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Self-love, it is at the core of all of this. And that's a tricky thing at this age, right? For kids to feel that way and about themselves. I would argue that the toolkit for well-being is really a kind of a recipe for self-love. It's making sure that we are staying connected to people that we care about and who care about us. It's about kind of controlling ourselves and our impulsivity. So having some self-regulation is really actually, if we're able to self-regulate, we're showing ourselves that we are important and that we care about how we are being in the world. The wandering mind is, so mindfulness is another way of sort of acting like we love ourselves. The next one is hope, having that hope. Taking care of ourselves by eating and drinking and exercising, and then connecting to something bigger than ourselves. So I think we're talking about the same exact thing here, Angela. It's and it's so important. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody has a different way of expressing exactly how to do that. And that's important too, because things I might say might not resonate as much as something that Angela might say.
Right.
And so that's where self-love might be a beautiful expression to use. And that's entirely appropriate. Thank you, Angela. Appreciate the question. Is there anybody else who has another question? Okay.
It looks like something came into the chat. I'm going to just see what that says.
All right.
What is your direct email? Okay, I can get you that. Who do I contact in New Mexico to get a list of certified mental health counselors in Sunland Park, New Mexico? Who do I contact in New Mexico to get a list? Yeah, I'm not sure. Psychology Today is a resource, but not all counselors are listed on Psychology Today. You could potentially contact the New Mexico Counseling Board.
Yes.
That might be a way to get a list.
I can help with that. That's how I found Carlotta. So I can help with that.
Pam had her hand up.
Yes. Sorry, who did you say,
So
Jeff?
Pam has her hand up, and then George.
Thank you. Pam, would you like to give us your question?
Yes, thank you. The obvious elephant in the room is social media, and I'm wondering what kinds of possible interventions can we do in terms of that. It seems like a lot of the root of the anxiety, fear of missing out, bullying starts with social media, which is a bigger influence on their lives than family and school.
Absolutely. Yes, such a good point and question, Pam. So I'll just say a little bit about one of the ways in which we are trying to address this is through our website. We're offering more positive forms of social media around mental health. But in our peer helping peer program, the natural helpers program that I told you about, what those natural helpers end up doing is not just going into the school and being the natural helpers, but they create a project that's then delivered to the school at the end of the year about mental health. And a lot of these are being geared more towards social media. So we had some of the kids last year create a TikTok account, and they just sort of went through the whole year interviewing people about mental health. So just putting more positive stuff on social media around mental health and having the youth themselves be the ones that are talking about it can be really impactful. We have little presentations here and there. In fact, I'm in the process of creating one for a classroom that's asked for cyberbullying support. That this is apparently happening outside of this classroom. So it's again through the need and what I want to say just really quickly here, and then I want to get to George and Maggie's questions, is that we really believe pretty wholeheartedly in what we're doing at the Sky Center. And what we often say when people say, what can we do to help, is we let them know that really it's donation that helps us be able to continue to provide that in like larger capacity. And so we don't have enough trainers, for example, to do all of the trainings that we are asked to do. So if we had a few more trainers, we might be able to do a little bit more. And so it's a tricky balance. We want to stay small and local and really focus on Santa Fe and northern New Mexico, but we have such need in all of just that community and beyond. So I hope
do you have any specific training for parents, family members on social media and their teenagers?
I'd have to look through the archive, but it's sounding familiar, obviously not recently, but we would be able to design something for that population. Absolutely.
Because it seems like it starts like about 6 or 7 years old. I mean, I don't know if we can approach it that early.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was going to say is, that maybe that is a good idea for a project for a club to take on, to make something like that by working with people like Carlotta to make it, really professional, and then be able to use that to distribute to the community. So keep that in mind, Pam. I think that's a great idea. I think George was next in line with a question, and then I'll get to you, Maggie. George.
Actually, my original question was Pam's question. So good question, Pam.
Okay, thank you, George.
But then I was also wanted to mention that if I, as a retiree in New Mexico, my main connection to youth now is my Rotary Club's Interact Club at the local high school. So this is possibly a topic that we could talk to clubs about how to approach.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Great idea. Yes. Thank you, George. Good idea. Maggie, would you like to go ahead with your question?
Oh, I can't hear you. You're not muted, but I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, anyway. So yeah, I worked with undergraduates and graduate students and postdocs and stuff at the university. But one of the things that we found really useful were to really write down all the things that when you thought about them made you feel happy. And then on the other side was a bug list. But the other thing that really has worked, and I even just encourage kids at the University of Utah who asked me to come because they were feeling depressed, was something like a survival manual. We did this once with freshmen and transfer students, mostly Native Americans, and everybody got to throw in information like who's the most help, what was my worst week, those sorts of things. And it really built the group together. Do you have groups that might do something like that?
We have, so our inner and outer life skills groups that we bring into the Santa Fe Public Schools is designed, again, it's pulled from our toolkit. So we are weaving in a lot of social connection, which is what you're talking, part of what you're talking about is social connection, and talking about the tough stuff. We don't put a whole ton of emphasis, it's not a process group, but we are, for example, we have this one little exercise that I love where the two of the youth sit back to back on the floor. And as they're sitting there, they are writing the things that they appreciate about the person whose back they have to them. And then they have to sort of lock arms and get up without their hands touching the ground. And so they struggle through that. Then they turn around and they tell each other what this little list was that they came up with. So we tend to bring in a lot more of the, like, deliberately bring in more of the hopeful stuff, the positive stuff. But as a result of that, naturally, the harder stuff comes out. And then we spend time sort of discussing. But it's a limited group, 8 weeks is what we do each semester. So yeah, that's a nice idea, though. I like what you're talking about doing. Yeah.
Yes, good question, Maggie. Thank you. And following on from that a little bit, I wanted to mention that I had found an article from the Clinton High School, and I forget exactly where in the world that is right now, but they have a big project where they take each grade level into the gym, and they have a program where they have this big canvas up on the wall, and they give each kid a feather, and they tell the child, or the student, I should say, they tell the student that they have to answer the question, what helps me? And as soon as the child has asked that question or stated what helps them, they put the feather in the poster. And by the end of the session, the poster is completely covered with these bird's feathers, and it's in the shape of a bird, and it's inspiring. And I thought that's exactly what you were talking about, where the kids are able to express in a safe environment what helps them, that they feel like they control the bus a little bit on this. And I would really like to see if we can perhaps take that a step further too.
That's beautiful. With the workshops that we bring into the classrooms, the very end piece of it is we hand out a little Post-it pad to all of the kids and ask them to write as many Post-its as they want on what they do that helps them. And then they all come and just tack it on this big poster board so that we get to see all of this, solution sitting right in front of us at the end of the training, the workshop. Yeah.
Excellent. The other thing I wanted to ask you.
Oh, looks like Karen has a question.
Karen, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted, Karen.
You're muted, Karen.
Thank you. I wanted to follow on Allison's conversation about what Rotary clubs can do. And one thing that Carlotta hasn't mentioned is our translator program. We provide interpretation, Spanish interpretation for all of the family counseling. And our Rotary Club has helped support that over the years through donations to our Good News Basket. So that's certainly something that I think that individual clubs could look at, would be finding a way to support the translation interpretation services in the mental health area in their communities, because it's so overlooked, but you can't do therapy if no one can understand what you're saying. So it's been remarkably successful for us. And so I recommend that. And thank you so much for your questions and your participation in this.
Yeah, Maggie, that's a great idea. Thank you. And we're always looking out for ways that Rotary can help. I wanted to get back with my question, and that is, Carlotta, when it comes to, if Rotary should start making these priorities, making these projects, what would you say would be the top priorities to look at?
The top priorities for projects regarding
this whole topic. If I don't mind whether we're trying to focus on parents or focus on students, or trying to get into the schools, or just being more self-aware and educated. What do you, from your perspective, what do you see as the top priority that we need to step on? Because I would like to feel that Rotary can come up with some projects to do that is sort of before we get to the anxiety and the self-harm, that we help students build their self-confidence and their self-regulations tools, so that they don't ever get into this predicament. And how do we do that? This is obviously a community event. It's not just students, it's parents, it's schools, it's everyone. And I just wondered how you would say, okay, focus on this. What's the top priority here?
Well, yeah, I would say it's prevention. But what exactly does prevention look like? And what came to mind is, we recently sat down with the mayor here in Santa Fe to talk about the mental health crisis, is what he called it. I don't know, I don't always like the term crisis. I want to focus on the hope again. Yes. And so we talked about doing, and this is all just sort of in conversation with other organizations in Santa Fe, but doing like a campaign on taking care of ourselves. So the Take Care campaign is sort of what we have like preliminarily called it. And this meant like kind of getting the word out, like just visually, right? So again, I don't know if this is going to happen, but what we've talked about is wrapping some things around buses and putting them on park benches. But it's kind of talking about how we take care. And of course, our solution for that is the Toolkit for Wellbeing. So how do we push that out into the world? So those kinds of, just let's be aware of it. It's sort of like, we saw that traffic accidents went down dramatically with kids and deaths by traffic accident when we started this campaign about seatbelts, right? We just saw it everywhere. I mean, you can all probably remember when that happened, and how effective that was, and what the results were. So it's about reaching as many people as we can, as cleverly as we can.
Yes. Oh, I like the idea of a campaign. I think that's something that clubs could certainly jump on board with and help spread the word. And Rotarians, I think, are very creative, so I'm sure we'll be able to come up with something. Jeff, I wanted to check in with you to see how much time we have left. We
just got a 5-minute cue.
Okay. All right. So are there any more questions that anybody would like to ask? I don't see any hands up.
I see Karen's face going towards the camera, though. Were you going to ask something else, Karen? Okay.
What did I have? Yeah, I think perhaps I've answered, well, you have answered all my questions. I do think this is a really, really important topic. And in actual fact, I know up in Los Alamos, which is the Rotary Club I belong to, we have been very concerned with this for many, many years. And so I hope that we there can perhaps develop a project. But what I was actually going to ask is if we could reach out to you in the future, because you talked about partnerships, and I think that might be a very, very important part of whatever we do as Rotarians. And I wondered if you had suggestions for the partnerships, where you looked for partnerships or where partnerships have come from.
Yeah, that's going to probably be something that I want to follow up with you
All right.
because our executive director, April Miller, is really kind of more she's got this is more her domain, I would say.
Okay. Okay.
So can we do that? Yeah, I'd love
All
to
right.
support that.
And that'd be excellent. And all right. So what I was thinking of doing is I'll put my email address up on the chat so that any of you who are participating today can get in touch with me. And in turn, I will then be able to get back in touch with all of you. So that would be great.
Allison, we have a quick question from George. I don't know if we have,
Yes.
but maybe just
Thank
a minute.
Okay.
Allison, I just like to put in a shameless plug. I'm also a volunteer with the Boy Scouts of America. And as of 3 years ago, the Boy Scouts of America include girls now.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
when I look at the toolkit list, everything from social connections, self-regulations, all the way down to nature, I think the scouting program, when it's run correctly, touches on all 6 of those. So that's something that kind of was noticeable to me.
Yeah.
Great. So and I think Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts is a great organization, is often involved with Rotary, teaches wonderful leadership skills, et cetera, et cetera. So that obviously is a good partner. Thank you, George. Great. Well,
someone had asked for my email, so I put that in the chat.
Great.
Email. Okay.
Thank you. And I can distribute to everybody if they let me know. So I'm going to wrap up and say, Carlotta, thank you very, very much for participating and educating us. We have learned so much from you, and I am inspired to be able to take some ideas back to our club and see how we can help with this. As I say, we'd like to stay in touch with you and do things appropriately and not use the wrong words and things like that. And so many, many thanks to you and Sky Center, and please thank April for putting your name forward when I reached out to her. I'd also like to thank Jeff Weinreich, because he was our technical smoothie. I call him that because everything went so well, and I want to thank each and every one of you for bringing forward your questions and joining us here today. And with that, I would like to release you all back to